So as we talk about these isms, industrialism and imperialism, we're going to start seeing the cause and effect relationship much more quickly. Again, in the past, we talked about overlapping eras. Remember the Renaissance, right? The new birth, the new learning led into the Reformation. The Renaissance led into absolutism, recognized as an overlording power. So Renaissance led into Enlightenment. Enlightenment led into the fall of absolutism, so it led into constitutionalism. We're going to see all of those lead into industrial revolution, and that's kind of what we want to talk about. So we want to talk about the beginnings of industrial revolution. Okay, number one, let's see, where did the Renaissance start? Where do we give credit for the Renaissance starting? Italy. Okay, and then we give credit for the Reformation starting where? Other side of France. Nope. Come on, Reformation. What'd you say, Kai? Germany. Okay, and then we give Enlightenment credit for starting where? France, right? And now we're going to give credit to Great Britain as starting the Industrial Revolution. We're going to see why, okay? First off, one of the things that's going on is what we call the cottage industry. Simply put, individual houses putting out different work. Different families doing different types of work. We also know this as the putting out system, okay? One of the things that we see here in the putting out system and the way this works is actually how a lot of people got their last names. What is the absolute most famous last name of them all, usually?
William.
Smith. Why is Smith one of the most popular last names? Partially, okay, mainly blacksmiths. Is you have Smith was a type of work. It was a type of industry that people used to do, okay? By smithing, we understand what we call blacksmithing, right? The working of iron, the shaping of iron into tools. Done? The shaping of iron into tools and things used, right? It's an old method. And families did this. And it usually turned their last name into Smith. There's a teacher across the hall by the last name of what?
Smith. Me.
You. Right here, Smith.
William.
Directly across the hall from us, Mr. Miller. You may not have met Mr. Miller yet, but he's a nice guy. Very laid back, kind of casual going guy, but do not take you guys stuff. He'll get you, okay? Miller. The reason Millers have the last name of Miller is because they used to be millers.
We are the Millers.
Okay, so what did a miller do? They ran mills, such as cotton mills, okay? They ran mills such as grain mills that ground grain into flour and ground corn into grits and things like that, okay? So all of these, some last names came from where people lived, okay? But a lot of last names, the most common last names usually, had to do with jobs, okay? What their actual jobs were. So talking about the cottage industry, the putting out system, is where families work in their homes to do a particular job. They worked in their homes. Blacksmiths worked out of their homes to form tools, shape different things. Okay, and it was a whole family type job. The millers worked out of their home to ground wheat into flour. One of the most important industries in England at the time was textiles. What is textile? It has to do with clothing, in particular cloth in general, okay? Cloth in general. Mostly clothing, okay? The cottage industry, what would happen is one family would buy raw cotton and then they would take it in there and they would spin it into yarn. Another family would weave it. Hello, weavers. They would weave it, right? Okay? So they would weave it into what we know as cloth. And then you get, oh, AirPods didn't come around quite yet, okay? But they would weave it into what we call cloth. And then you would have seamstresses that would actually seam it together or sew it together into actual clothing. And it would be different families in different villages that would do this. Most of their cotton, by the way, came from where? Very important to remember this, especially for U.S. history. From cotton fields. Right. But cotton fields from the U.S. The way it would work, and this is just kind of a precursor to what you probably already learned in U.S. history, right? Is we bought, the United States sent cotton to Great Britain. Great Britain would send back clothes before the American Revolution especially, but even afterwards, we bought most of our clothes from Great Britain. Some of the problems with the putting out system is it's very difficult to supervise when you have different families, okay, doing different things. Family did things at their own pace. So it's difficult to supervise. Another thing was Holy Monday. Holy Monday came along. Holy Monday was the day after Church Day. It's a day of rest, the beginning of the week. People didn't do anything on Monday.
Ooh, we should have that. Yeah, why don't we have that?
I know, right? Sunday is our fun day.
No.
Monday is just another manic Monday. Sorry, so I'm way older than you. Almost older than me. Okay? Just another manic Monday.
Oh,
Wish it
that's
were a
the song. That's
Sunday.
the song.
That's my fun day.
What's the song? From like the 80s on.
Yes, early 80s at that. Okay?
I know it's something.
So the solution would become factory production. Factory production. So the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, as we already talked about, was Great Britain. Okay? Was Great Britain. A lot of historians seek to ask was there an actual Industrial Revolution? I would have to say that it would absolutely have to see yes. But why Great Britain? Yes, ma'am. 1760. Right about 1760 is kind of what we give the credit to. Why Great Britain? Well, first of all, we have a lot of rivers. What are rivers used for? Transportation. Not only transportation, but power. Okay? Y'all probably seen these big wheels with water running through them and turning those wheels, right? Well, before we actually had electricity, we used water to turn wheels. Super important for grain manufacturing and grain grinding and things like that. Okay? We could harness the power of running water, natural running water to do different things. Also, some of the important things that Great Britain had to offer is coal and iron. Of course, we didn't know before this time period what coal and iron would help us to do, but we're starting to see coal and iron used more and more. And of course, sheep giving us what?
Wool.
Wool to also make clothing with. Okay? So we see this as the height of the textile industry. We're fixing to see the height of the textile industry anyway. Because of cheap transportation, cheap power, and the abundance of coal and iron. What, if I were to sum up these things in 2 words, what could we call these things? The water, the iron, the coal, the sheep. What are those?
Oh,
Natural resources. Very good. Natural resources. So again, why Britain? Well, we have human advantages other than just natural resources. One of the things that Great Britain did is they chartered a national bank in the late 1600s. National Bank gave gave the ability to loan money for people to have access to money to buy things needed. Great Britain had private property rights. People could actually own their own land. We had the aristocrats that would invest in commerce and industry. Somebody had an idea. You've seen Shark Tank, right?
Yeah.
You've never seen Shark Tank? You are missing out on good Friday night entertainment. Matter of fact, if you have never seen Shark Tank, you are dead to me. Those of you who see it know what I'm talking about. Okay? Mr. Wonderful says that a lot. Kevin O'Leary. The idea behind Shark Tank and the idea behind investing is that you had an idea, you had a business idea, you would take it before people that had money to help invest in your business. To do what now? The famous what? So what are they investing in with
Why
it?
do they call it Shark? Oh, yeah.
Oh, and so they're not investing in other athletes. It's just different product. Okay, I got you. Because investors are called sharks. Okay, sharks. They're out to make a lot. What did you say, Lakai? They're out for blood, so to speak, is kind of what they say. And so,
They be telling them straight up that their products are trash.
yeah, they will. I mean, they're out to get money. They'll fight for money, is kind of the idea, suspicion behind it. And then you had canals. Canals would increase, the waterway increased transportation system and invention. You had people willing to take risks in inventing new things. We're going to talk about some of those inventions and how they affected and worked well together to start the Industrial Revolution. Why Britain? Natural advantages, the natural resources, again the human advantages, canals, the free market economy, capital, national bank, private property rights, enclosures. We'll talk about enclosures in just a moment. Here are some of the inventions. Okay, I definitely want you to write down all three of these. I'm going to give you a minute to write down all three of these. All right, so different inventions we definitely want to talk about is the spinning jenny. You see right there the spinning jenny. All the spinning jenny does. Everybody's seen cotton, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Seen a
yeah.
little ball of cotton, looks like fluff. How in the world do they take and turn that into the clothes we wear? Starts off with a spinning jenny. What the spinning jenny does is it takes and it stretches out the cotton fibers, weaves it in with other cotton fibers to simply make yarn or thread. The cloth that we're wearing, the material that it's made out of anyway, is made with individual threads that are simply weaved together. The spinning jenny makes the individual thread. Before, all this was done by hand. Very tedious, taking a long time process. Okay? The water frame is what takes those individual threads and makes into clothes. Literally, what it does is it weaves into thread. Okay? Weaves into, packs it very close together. Okay? The reason they call it water frame is this frame was powered by water.
You know what the water frame looks like? The upgraded version of the heat train.
Kinda, okay? Kinda. For centuries, they have been doing this stuff by hand. Okay? And then the spinning mule, okay? The spinning mule was a much faster version of the spinning jenny, okay? Spinning jenny could make thinner, stronger thread faster. Very important to remember these things, okay? Very important. What we are doing is we are decreasing production time. meaning we can make more thread quicker and cheaper, which allows us to make more material, cloth, quicker and cheaper, which allows us to make more clothes quicker and cheaper. Okay? The water frame for Gerald Wright, 1768, held several hundred spindles required water power to operate. Several hundred spindles. Okay? So before you had one person using just a few spindles, maybe a dozen, couple dozen, depending on the size shop that they had. Here with the water frame, you could use several hundred at a time, okay? Making a whole lot of cloth and material, okay? Again, required water to operate, okay? And what we had is we had a machine that was too big to be housed in homes. So we had villages turning into cities because it was impossible to house these machines in homes, so they began to build mills, okay? Mills housing thousands, dozens of water frames, housing dozens of water frames, and they had to build these by, of course, a water system, a running water system. So a lot of times a canal would not suffice. Okay. Again, why near rivers?
Water.
Water is the power, right? Water is the power. Had to be running water. Water power is a finite power system. By finite, meaning it has a limit to it, right? So only so many water frames could be built, and only by major rivers. And by major rivers, rivers that aren't affected so much by lack of rain or too much rain, okay? You get smaller rivers that can overflow their banks or almost dry up, were very unpredictable, depending on how much rain you had that year. Does that make sense? Everybody with me?
Not yet, not yet.
Not yet, not yet. So we don't totally see the going away from the factory system yet. Not totally. Or excuse me, going away from the cottage industry yet. Okay? Not totally. But we're getting there. Yes, ma'am.
So it said housing in thousands, dozens of workers.
Thousands was marked out.
Okay, so it's
Just dozens. Just dozens. Okay? And then we have the introduction of coal. What good is coal?
You burn it.
Coal, you burn it, right? So with coal, we found out that you could burn it, all right? So what does burning give us? Heat, right? All right, so we had access to a lot of coal, providing massive amounts of energy in comparison to water. What energy could he produce? Able to cook stuff. Able to cook stuff. We haven't come up with electricity yet, right? Trains.
They didn't have electricity.
How do they run trains?
Coal.
How does coal run
Steam
trains?
power.
They burn it. Steam power is what I'm getting to, right? They burn it, heat water up, right? Water boils, turns into steam. You've got power, right? And lots of power. So, so with coal, with the factories coming up, with machines coming up, we're seeing the dying out of the cottage industry. Okay, so we also see a rise of Luddites. Think of Luddites as probably the first organized labor union, although it was not organized very well. Right, son? Finite means limited number of it, okay? Finite, you have a limited. Infinite, we've heard of infinite, right? Infinite, infinity, there is unlimited, going on forever. So finite would mean that it is limited. Agree? Sorry? She's here? On her way? Isabel, library. See Mr. Williams. The Luddites, no, he didn't say to, anyway. The Luddites, with Ned Ludd, okay? Ned Ludd was a mythical meaning fiction, right? He wasn't real. Mythical creature. What they would go and do is they would go and they would smash these machines. Think about something. These machines could produce more stuff quicker. Why would that be a problem? Less jobs, putting small people out of businesses, ending the cottage industry, right? We're starting to see an end to the cottage industry. So families are now without jobs. Families no longer have the means to provide for their family, right? So the Luddites, this mythical creature, would come in and smash machines, all right? Hopefully getting them to turn to these cottage industries again, all right? Kaya, you look confused. Why? Do what? Well, okay, so why a mythical creature? Why go in and smash machines? Who's going to admit to smashing somebody else's property? Right? Nobody's going to. So what they did is, oh, that was Ned Ludd. Ned Ludd come in again, right? This is the idea of leprechauns and stuff like that coming in. So they just made up a name to come in and destroy stuff. Leprechaun, because it's St. Patrick's Day tomorrow.
Oh, now tomorrow's St. Patrick's Day.
Not my decision. So we see the entrance to the importance of universities here. Guys, please don't write everything on the screen. You're gonna kill me. Okay, University of Glasgow. They were starting to emphasize science. They were starting to emphasize. Some universities were anyway starting to put an emphasis on researching new things. University of Glasgow in Scotland is one of those, and one of the things that we see come out of that is James Watt and his steam engine. Steam power. Okay, in 1705 was the first experimental steam engine, but in 1769, watch out world, here I come. Here I come. Okay, so in 1769, we see the almost perfection of the steam engine. James Watt. Anybody familiar with the term watts?
Yeah, it's that stuff on the microwave that tells you how strong it is.
You have them on microwaves, you have them on toasters, you have them on blenders, you have them on that. Anything that takes power. We take that name from James Watt to kind of measure the power outputage that particular appliance does, okay, or it gives out. So James Watt perfects basically the steam engine. Not basically, he pretty much does perfect the steam engine, okay? We take James Watt's design of the steam engine and we put them in the mills, okay? No longer do mills have to be on rivers. All we need is some sort of water source, right? Still very convenient for them to be by rivers, right? But they don't have to be right there on the river. The problem with rivers is they're very windy, and the banks are not as secure to build buildings on as what they would like. However, if you get just a few feet off of the river, right, it could be very beneficial. James Watt allowed for this, okay? 1770s, we see a great boost of power. The water can run only so much. The strength of the river can only handle so much. However, we can put a steam engine in there and we can do a whole lot more. We put steam engines in there, another 2 steam engines in there, and we can double that capacity. So all of a sudden we see small mills starting to turn into large factories, okay? Large factories. Steam engine. And then we find out not only can the steam engine, here's a picture of the steam engine by the way, we can put steam engines on this thing called a train. What?
Why did I think the steam engine is so
That's what I thought too.
That's because that's the main thing that we talk about, especially in early U.S. history. Two things that the steam engine is really used for is the train. Okay, but the engine runs so much more than just the train. Oh, and the other thing, ships, right? No longer do we have to have sails, but we also use ships. Okay, which makes it very important because then we can not only make things quicker, but we can do what? We can ship things quicker too. So with the steam engine, with the building of the mills, increasing their production and turning into factories, we see cities start to develop, okay? Cities like Manchester, cities like Liverpool especially. The cottage industry is going out. The inventions on the farm, we can produce a lot more things a lot quicker, right, on the farm as well. We're going to talk about that in just a second also. But with cities and people losing their jobs with the cottage industry, they're going to look for jobs, right? Hello? Maybe.
What?
Maybe not. Maybe they're just going to pour and shrivel up and die because they're not eating. I don't know. Okay. No, they're not. They're going to go look for jobs to provide for their families. So we start seeing the increase in cities. Why build these factories near larger populated areas? More people to work. The larger the population, the more people to work, right? So the more people you have, if you build them out in the country where there's only like one person per square mile because of the big farms, a little bit of an exaggeration, but you get the idea, right? There's less people out in the country. So you want to build them near towns and things like that.
And Liverpool.
So we start to see what's called the idea of Cottonopolis, metropolis, okay, metropolitan area, larger areas. Cottonopolis is what England kind of became known as. We see. I'm gonna actually don't even worry about that one. I'm gonna skip it just for time's sake because we did NHD. We're running on a little less time. We start to also see railroads pop up, right? The steam engine made possible for railroads. Transportation of goods was still a problem until railroads were developed. We started to see the iron that England has. Not yet, okay? Started to see the iron that England has, and we can start to lay down tracks, and we start to, where we had the road system for horse and buggy before, now we can start to, with the steam engine, we can carry larger loads further, making transportation faster, and you can carry more products faster. Let me say it that way. So I won't stutter. What?
The 1805, 1830.
Yeah, why not? That'll be good. That'll be good.
Wow, 16 Wow.
Woo! And they nicknamed it the Rocket. The Rocket, right? The Rocket could travel 16 miles an hour. A horse could go that fast, so what's the big deal?
They have horses.
They had horses.
They ain't trained the horses back then.
They did have horses.
They ain't-
However, they couldn't pull the load at 16 miles an hour
Yeah.
that what a railroad car could, right? So again, you could carry more goods faster. More goods faster. Goods can now be produced and transported in mass quantities. Mass quantities. You can make a whole bunch of stuff real fast and ship it to your customers even faster.
And
So what's the goal there? You make more products cheaper, what's that going to do? If you're a business owner, you're going to get what?
More money.
More money, especially more profit, right?
Make it cheaper.
More. If we can make it cheaper, we can get more
People
profit, right?
make more
If we can ship more, we can do what?
Make more profit.
Make more profit. Why?
Because it's getting there faster.
It's getting it there faster. It's getting it there cheaper. So again, we're making more profit, which allows us to do what?
If it's cheaper, more people want to buy it.
Make more goods. If we can make more goods, we can do what with those
Make more
goods?
profit.
We can sell those goods. If we can sell those goods, what we can do what?
Make
Now,
more profit.
there you go, Lakaya. You can make more profit. If you're making more profit, guess what you can do with that profit?
Spend it.
Buy more stuff.
Make the price
You
higher.
can buy more stuff, which is doing what?
Giving builders more money.
It's giving somebody else the opportunity to make more money. So if they're making more money, guess what they're doing? They're spending more money, which gives somebody else the opportunity to make more money. It's the way the economy works, right? If you have a job, watch it. If you have a job working at Ingalls, you got to do what? Okay, you're building ships as your job, right? But what must you do to provide for your family? You got your paycheck, you go cash your paycheck. What must you do to provide for your family?
Buy food.
You got to get food. So you go where?
This one.
Jerry Lee's. So you are supporting. Hang on. Shh. So you go to Jerry Lee's and you buy groceries. Guess what the Lee family can do? They can go to Walmart and buy clothes, right?
Oh, yay.
So it's the idea. Listen, if you have a job, you contribute to the economy. Before this big factory system, people were not only working in their house, right, but they also were having to grow their own food in a lot of ways. So one of the things that this does is by pulling up the factory system and them making more money, the factories can hire more people because they need to make more product, right? So as they're making more product and hiring more people to make that product, they're providing jobs. And just because a factory, we'll use Ingalls for an example, there is what's called the support industry. Two things to the support industry. I'm not talking about the part suppliers and things like that. That's also called support industry. But the family support industry. You have to go out and you have to buy food. You go out and you buy clothing, okay? Those are the main important things from here on out. But one of the things that we're going to see, especially with the second industrial revolution, is we get to buy luxury goods because we're making more money, okay? Right now, we're still in a slump with the first industrial revolution because we're making things and we're starting to increase production. Right now, what we're seeing is people losing jobs in the rural areas because what they were doing in the cottage industry is no longer happening, right? But because of these things, we're seeing the putting out system or the cottage industry decline because the mills and the factories can make more stuff cheaper, okay? Which gives less and less and less and less need for the cottage industry. Make sense? Mike, you had a question. You stretching? Okay, good. All right. So with that, we have a dilemma. We have a dilemma. What is the dilemma? Thomas Malthus and the principle of population. Food supply and growth is arithmetic, but population growth is geometric, right? Simply meaning this. Food supply growth is arithmetic. We can add to the food supply growth. No problem. Population growth is geometric. How many of you have geometry right now?
Me.
What is geometry dealing with?
Shapes.
Shapes, right? Okay, so shapes. So why is population growth a shape dilemma? A geometric dilemma?
Because of where they live, that place they live.
You have rivers, you have mountains, all confining the size of cities, right? We don't have the ability yet to build up as far as multi-story buildings and things. We can only build out. The problem with that is we have so much land. We can't start taking too much land because if we start taking too much land, we start taking away farmland, which is the food supply, right? And we must continue to grow the food supply. So, go ahead, Katie. So, the problem is we're running out of land in the cities. We're beginning to run. We're not yet, but he says if we continue on the trend that we're doing, number one, we won't have enough food. Number two, we're going to run out of land. Are you following me?
Yeah. Is it Thomas Malthus, the dude that said that we would start competing for food because population's growing?
That's exactly what we're talking about right here. Exactly what we're talking about. Okay? Did y'all talk about this biology?
Yeah,
Really?
with Charles Darwin and that guy.
Yeah.
I
Because I remember.
Well, that guy may be right. I'm not much of a Darwin fan, but that guy may be right. Whoever that guy is.
The guy that said that the acquired traits guy as they were living.
You talking about the total?
Oh, the
you talking
giraffe
about
guy?
the
Yeah.
one that said,
Yeah.
No, that's
The
Charles.
giraffe
That's
got
a
it.
Darwin.
It was evolution.
Although
Evolution.
that's Charles Darwin, and Charles Darwin
Yeah.
announced his theory of evolution before he died. I just think that's very important. Okay? The Malthus dilemmas is exactly what Katie, that's her name, that girl. That's exactly what Katie was saying. If we continue on the trend, we're going to start consuming more resources than we're producing. Our population is going to outgrow our possibility of food production. Anybody not following me? Anybody have questions on that? Okay? Our population growth is going to start consuming more food than we have. Population growth. And then we have Ricardo and the iron law of wages. Higher wages will only result in population growth. Therefore, workers should only be paid subsistence wages. What is subsistence wages?
Money.
Just enough to take care of your family.
Minimum wage.
Just enough to get by. Okay? Higher wages only lead to population growth. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put on our mature hats for a moment. When people are happy, more babies are born. Okay? When people are happy, more babies are born. When you don't have to fight and scrap and scrape for every bit of food that you put in your mouth, more babies are born. Okay? People like being happy. All right, and moving on.
Subsistence.
Ask your mother.
What's subsistence?
Never put on my.
Malthus and Ricardo are referring to what we call a dismal science. Thomas Carlyle is the one who coined the phrase dismal science. We're going to run out of food, but we need to increase production. But if we increase production, the population, we're going to have to hire more people. We hire more people, we're going to have to pay them more. If we pay them too much, they're going to be too happy and creating too many babies to be born. But we need more babies to be born because children are our workforce.
Just let them be happy and have babies.
Thomas Carlyle says that economics is a dismal science. Economics, by the way, is one of the only things that you will learn in school. One of the only things that you'll learn in school that absolutely directly affects your everyday life. Directly affects. Government, it affects your everyday life because it's the laws that you have to follow. So that's kind of directly, right? But even more so, economics. History. If we don't know our history, we're condemned to repeat it. That's a quote. Right? So we need to know history so we can go forward because history is cause and effect, right? So we absolutely need to know our history so that we know how we got to where we are today. So hopefully we won't repeat the mistakes that we made yesterday and we can move forward from today. Right?
Who said that?
Me. That was Coach Green.
No,
That one was Coach Green, okay? We must know what the mistakes that we made yesterday so that we can move forward from today. As a matter of fact, I just made that up. There wasn't a planned speech or anything, but I like it. Somebody reminded me to write that down. Okay? So Micah don't steal it. Okay?
I got you.
So we've got to know where we're going. History does directly affect our lives regardless of what you think. But economics will directly affect your lives in a much more everyday way. We use it every day, and Thomas Carlyle said it's a dismal science. We've got to figure out how we can increase food production because population is growing, but if population grows at the rate that the food growth is growing, we're going to way outdo our resources. Way outdo our resources. That's why Thomas Carlyle calls it a dismal science. And then that last one down there, the possibilities curve, has to do with with our given resources. I teach economics. As a matter of fact, it's the first day of economics. I'm kind of excited about it. I hated economics when I was your age in school, but now that I've actually learned it and get to teach it, I really like it. Because we have something because of production possibilities, which simply means with the amount of workers that we have, and the amount of cotton that we have, and the amount of other resources such as energy and coal right now that we're talking about that we have, what is the most that we can produce?
Water.
And guess what business producers want to do?
You can't produce water.
They want to produce that absolute most. Why? Because with that absolute most, if we sell every bit of it, it makes us more money. If we're making more money, we have a higher profit. And if we have a higher profit, guess what we can do?
Spend it.
We can buy more stuff and do it again and invest in our businesses, and we can buy more, and we can produce more, and we can make more, and we can increase our profits. If we increase our profits, guess what we get to do?
Spend it again.
And make it right.
We can go buy stuff and make us look cool. Because we get rich. And when we get rich, we look really cool. Right? And we're really happy so we can have more babies. Right? Why not? Because I want to get your attention, right? It's a production process. They called it a dismal science, and it is. And here's an example. Here's an example of a production possibility curve. If you look at that inside line, right? That inside line is our first production possibility curve, and that's the most we can produce with the amount of workers that we have, with the amount of resources that we have. So let's just say I have just this side of the room, the side on my left hand working, right? And I can only produce to that blue line. But guess what? All of you guys are unemployed. You're moving to the cities and you're looking for work. If I hire you, guess what I can now produce? I've got more hands working, so my production's possibilities increase, right? Thomas Carlyle came up with this idea of the production's possibility curve. He said if we hire more people, if we put more resources to work, guess what we can do? We can make more. And if we make more, guess what we can do? We can get more money and make more profits. And if we make more profits, guess what we can do? We can get rich and get happy and have babies. And if we have more babies, guess what we can do?
Make more workers.
We can put them to work. We can put them to work. Because at this time there are no child labor laws. And one of the main reasons to have children is to put them to work so we can do what? Make more money. Actually, if you're that rich, you'd send them to school. But production's possibility. Please, please, please. Please, please, please remember this when you get in my economics class and you're in the 12th grade. I'm still teaching economics. Sometimes. Sometimes. You know what he does? He laughs at me. Oh. Children is slave labor, sort of. Because children work for the family. And we're going to talk about that. Again, I am exaggerating a little bit on that because if you're that rich person, then your kids go to school, they don't go to work in the factories. However, we will talk about children going to work in the factories. One of the things that we see with production increasing, people making more money, the standard of living raises. What is the standard of living? I'm no longer buying Walmart brand. I'm going to Belk. Right? And then if I get a raise, guess what I'm doing? I'm quitting Belk. I'm ordering offline to Macy's. Right? And then if I get a raise, guess what? I'm no longer buying Macy's. I'm going to get, hey, there you go. Come on now, somebody. Instead of buying that sterling silver stuff, guess what I'm doing?
Straight gold.
I'm buying gold. I'm going straight gold. My fake teeth ain't wooden no more. They gold. Hey, y'all laugh, but George Washington had fake wooden teeth.
Yes,
Guess who made them?
That's why I never saw
Guess who made them? Patrick Henry.
Right.
Give me liberty or give me death. Yep. Okay, so standard of living. Does everybody understand what, seriously, listen, everybody understand what standard of living is? I'm exaggerating the standard of living from going to Walmart, to Belk, others, right? Okay? But it is that same idea. I can buy more stuff. No longer am I starving. I can actually feed my family. is really what we're going to, okay? No longer am I starving and unemployed. I can actually feed my family now. No longer am I living on a tent on the outside. I can maybe rent a room in the city somewhere. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is the true standard of living that we're talking about. Now, those that are renting a room somewhere, they can maybe buy a little house, or we're in Britain, a flat. Right? Okay? So
So what
just
do they call a big house?
a big flat.
A big flat?
Okay. So let's talk about the agricultural revolution real quick. The agricultural revolution, okay? The British agricultural revolution. One, since we're still in Great Britain, when we're talking about agriculture, we're talking about what? Farming, right? Now, if we're talking about Britain, we're talking about British. But if we're talking about agriculture, regardless of where it's at, we're talking about farming. We're talking about cattle. We're talking about crops. We're talking about corn and potatoes and things like that. Not so much corn to make produce, right? Produce and meat section. Think of that. Think of the produce and meat section. Okay? So the agricultural revolution is one of the things that we're starting to see in the 17th century, okay? We're starting to see innovation.
Have you ever seen that video?
Can't say that I have. So, let's get set. Let's get set to learn about this agricultural revolution. There are 3 keys to this agricultural revolution: science, entrepreneurship, and technology. Science, entrepreneurship, and technology. S-E-T. Get set. Right? You following me? You see that there? You see the acronym?
Go.
We like acronyms in education. Okay? So let's get set. Agriculture, innovation, the farmer as a scientist. Okay? In the Middle Ages, we see a 3-field crop rotation. Somewhere along the line, it was actually taught to us in the Bible, that whenever you're farming, it takes nutrients out of the land. Different things take different nutrients out of the land. Wheat takes out different nutrients than oats do. Okay? So in the Middle Ages, our main production was bread. Okay? One of our main food sources were bread. That comes from wheat and oats. Okay? Wheat in particular, and then oats. So what you do is you have on this 3-crop rotation. One year you would plant wheats, next year you would plant oats, and the next year you would do what's called lay the ground fallow. You know what that means? You don't do anything with it. Okay? You let it rest. Exactly. You let it rest. You should have somewhat, okay? So it's just a refresher for you. Good. And then what we start to see, we start learning that different things that we plant can put nutrients back into the ground. Okay? So we have a 4-field crop rotation. Okay? We have wheat, oats, clover, and turnip. My understanding about clover, I don't know what clover is used for, except that it is used as a grain that you can actually eat. However, it's very bitter and not very good. But something that clover did and turnips did is they put different types of nutrients back into the ground also, okay? So it helps out. So what we see here is we start to see, and when we plant clover, clover is also one of those things that puts nutrients back into the ground. So clover has some uses, but my understanding is it's not much, okay? So instead of not doing anything, you plant clover and let that ground, instead of resting, you have somewhat usage, but not much. So it's a year of putting that nutrients back into the ground. Am I making sense? Okay. No, it does not. Cloves comes from something else. Oats. It goes wheat, oats, clover, turnip. Wheat, oats, clover, turnips. Not that important that you know what they were, but that they went from a 3 to a 4. Why? Well, number one, you could get more production. It's also important to know that if you're this farmer owning this box of land, you're not going all wheat, all oats the next year, all clover the next. You're going to divide up your land and maybe do wheats, oats, clover, turnip here, right? Okay, and then you would just maybe rotate. Does that make sense? So you're always planting something, because if you literally do that, then 1 year you're totally without any money. Does that make sense? So understand that there's that rotation going on as well. And then moving along, we have more fields, okay? More fields. The more fields that we plant, just very obviously, the more food that we get, right? Yield. We call this the yield, all right? If, I'll be quite honest with you, I'm thinking about once tax money comes in, I'm going to the Lucedale auction and getting me a steer, maybe a pig too, okay? You pay so much for that steer on the hoof, and that steer or pig has so much yield. What the yield means is that means how much food can I actually get compared to the whole thing. Does that make sense? So I can get somewhere between 40 and 60% yield. In other words, of the total cow, I can get somewhere between 40 and 60% of that is actually edible food. Does that make sense? Okay? So the more fields that we plant, the more yield that I get, the more food that I get, right? Does that make sense? Are y'all following me? Okay. So, and then we go to selective breeding. Selective breeding. I figured out, or they figured out, that if you take the biggest cows, genetics are involved. If you take the biggest bull and made it with the biggest heifer, you get a bigger baby.
Yeah.
And that baby will grow bigger, okay? If you ever looked at, now, sometimes you have a mutant, okay? And by mutant, I mean, you ever seen really, really short parents with a really, really tall kid? Yeah, dad's always wondering who the dad really is, okay? Huh?
My dad wants to know why my little brother has
Your mom's a little taller. You're not taller than your mom, are you? Okay, really? So, yeah, I knew that, right? But most of the time, tall people produce tall people. Does that make sense? It's just genetics. So if you take and breed them selectively, the bigger ones with the bigger ones, you usually produce bigger ones. Does that make sense? Y'all follow me? Okay, so they figure that out. So, yay, science. Tell your science teachers I said that. Okay?
I don't have a science teacher.
One of the things that we notice, though, is that we start to have different genetic defects. This doesn't necessarily mean anything is wrong with them, but we start seeing different colors, the Belgian blue. It's kind of like, mixed people, right? Somebody that has a black mom or dad marrying a white woman, right? Mom or dad, they produce a lighter skinned person. Mike is over there turning red instead of light skinned now, right? So it's the same idea, right? And one of those things comes from what we know now as the breed Belgian blue. Kind of got a blue tint to it in color, but nothing's wrong with it. But we have a much better breed of cow. And by much better means that we get a higher yield, okay? Where a 1,000-pound steer before may have only produced 300 pounds of meat, a 1,000-pound steer now may produce 600 pounds of meat, right? Does that make sense? Okay? So we do have much better. And then we see the farmer as an entrepreneur. What do we mean by entrepreneur? What is an entrepreneur?
Somebody that makes their own business.
Entrepreneur is somebody willing to take a risk and risk their own money and come up with new ideas and new inventions and new ways of thinking and get out there and sell them. By entrepreneur, we're talking about taking traditional agriculture and changing it. What was traditional agriculture before? One of the things is just the way that they did things, right? We're changing traditional agriculture. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And if I'm moving fast, it's not so important slides, I promise. One of the things is the way they took breaks. We gotta stop thinking of this as just getting out there and getting the fields done. We've gotta start thinking of this as a business. Right? We gotta start thinking of this as a business. We can't be so lackadaisical about things. Right? Another way is we do away with the common pasture. Take a look at that. What do I mean by common? the commons area in the school. The Panther Den that we call it now used to be called the commons area. What does that mean? It's everybody's.
I've never seen you.
It belongs to everybody. There is no set boundaries. Okay? So everybody can take their cows and put in the common pasture. Everybody can take their sheep and put in the common pasture. Nobody's particular one place. It's for the entire village, so to speak. Okay? So what they start doing is they come up with no, they come up with the enclosure system. They start closing off pieces of land and saying, this is where my cows eat. How do they do that? They put out fences. Very good. That's it. That's all the enclosure system is they take the former common pasture and they build fences. Okay? Not allowing their cows to get into somebody else's field, or your cows, more importantly, your cows getting into where my cows eat. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's all the enclosure system is. So you definitely need to know the enclosure system. Super important. The enclosure movement. The downside, some of the poorer farmers who don't really have that much land have to rely on small parts of land. The upside, however, is it kept from overpopulating fields. If you overpopulate fields, here's what they say. My understanding, I am by no means a farmer, but they say it takes 1 acre per cow to feed them properly over long periods of time. 2 cows? Okay. 2 acres per cow. Okay? 2 acres, that's double, that's a lot, right? 2 acres per cow. Have to take your word for it, because I am definitely not a farmer. Otherwise, you don't have enough grass to feed the cow, the amount of cows throughout the years. Does that make sense?
my cows out on a leash and
You're gonna put your cow on
You could have done that in common pasture, but in closed lands, then you're trespassing on somebody else's land, right?
Yeah, it was probably more different back then because they wanted them to stay off each other's land.
Right. Well, that's why they had the enclosure movement, because they say, hey, we realize that we need so much land per heifer or steer, right? Okay.
Perfect.
It's a female cow.
Heifer is a female cow.
Yes, it is.
All right.
No wonder.
So one of the things that this led to were English poor laws. Okay. With English poor laws, you had what's called workhouses pop up. Okay. Workhouses were simply, kind of think of them as apartment buildings somewhat. If you ever watch old westerns and they start talking about bunkhouses, it's where the ranch hands or the employees go to sleep. That's more like what these poorhouses were, or workhouses were. It housed the families of workers, okay? Housed the families of workers. It provided shelter and employment for them, all right? They would be employed, sometimes by common people, sometimes by common villages, and sometimes simply by one farmer. See if we can get through. Bigger farms equal more food. Bigger farms equal more food. Don't write down the rest of that. Just write down bigger farms equal more food. Okay? Large landowners were able to produce more food simply because they had more land. Right? And it's the idea that Michael and I are talking about. It takes so much land per animal to produce a good yield. All right? And then we have agriculture as the inventor. The farmer as the inventor, excuse me. One of the things that we see them inventing, again, we have the innovation thing, start thinking new ways of thinking, thanks Renaissance period, is the sower, right? What does the sower do? The sower plants seed, okay? What you see here is you see the sower with a bag, and he is just throwing or dropping seed out. So to begin with, we have to plant by hand. Make a little hole in the ground, plant the seed, cover the little hole up. One person taking hours to do this. Hours and days to plant large fields. Sometimes weeks to plant large fields, depending on how many people they have to work with. But thank goodness for a man named Jethro Tull. Jethro Tull invented something called the seed drill. Ladies and gentlemen, all you need to know is Jethro Tull and the seed drill. It was a horse-drawn machine to plant food. Now, as fast as you could walk, it would poke the hole, plant the seed, and cover it up for you. And so instead of taking minutes to plant one piece of seed, you could plant several within a minute. Okay? Several. Way cutting down the time. If you cut down the time, guess what you can do? Make more money. We see these men. Who are these men? George Washington, who's in the top right. Thomas Jefferson. We see George Washington come up with the idea of the 16-sided house. The 16-sided house was simply a place, and you're not going to be tested on this. This is just out of curiosity. The 16-sided house, okay, he came up with the idea, came up with the plans, and what it did, it's called threshing wheat or beating the grain out of the wheat, basically. He said we could take horses in the 16-sided house, because if you do 16 sides, it basically makes it what?
No.
It almost makes it round, right? It's twice as many sides as an octagon, so it makes it round. So what horses can do is they can run over it and they can trample it, right? And it's got this, you noticed it was kind of on a hill. If you saw it correctly, it was kind of on a hill. So it had two different stories. The horses would run on one part and the grain would fall to the next. He had his own business doing this. People would bring wheat to the washing to Mount Vernon and allow him to thresh their wheat. And then you had a portable threshing machine come about. So you could take and you could harvest the wheat, you could throw it in this machine, and because of the horses pulling it, it would do it automatically for you as well. Okay? So we just see the different lines of invention. Better tools equal what? Better tools equal more food. I'm not going to ask you, but just, as a matter of fact, I'm going to skip it right now because of time, and we'll see graphs later. The English Agricultural Revolution, again, notice this. Notice the amount of food that's, that's starting to be produced. Notice the 1800s, the mid-1600s to the 1700s, the food production drastically increases, right? What does that do to? Better tools. Better tools. The 18th century, because we have better tools, because we have more food, we see a population growth. Okay? Now, due to advances in science, entrepreneurship, and technology is the reason for all of this. Okay? Any questions? All right. Had to speed through that last little bit, but